Security, I need a man removed from the lobby. Male, black, blue shirt corner seat. Victoria Hayes hung up and folded her arms, satisfied. She had no idea she had just called security on the man who signed her paycheck. Ethan Carter owned the building. He owned the company. He was the majority shareholder and chairman of the board, sitting there in a faded shirt with a 9-year-old laptop. He could end this in 3 seconds. He didn't. He had spent 40 years being asked to prove he belonged, and this morning his daughter had asked him why. The guards were 5 minutes away. In those 5 minutes, Victoria Hayes would lose her job, and it would not be for failing to recognize her boss. The morning had started in a car in traffic with a question he wasn't ready for. Ethan Carter drove his daughter to school every weekday at 6:45, and the drive had a rhythm to it that he had come to depend on more than he liked to admit. Lily was 8 years old and talked the entire way about weather and lunch and whether snails had feelings, and he mostly listened and said, at the right places. It was the only 20 minutes of his day that nobody scheduled. He had built a company with more than 400 employees, and he had never once let anyone put a meeting inside those 20 minutes. They were 2 blocks from the school when Lily went quiet, which almost never happened. "Dad," she said, "how come the security lady always asks your name and she never asks Emma's dad his name?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. The light ahead turned yellow and he let the car slow to a stop, and he let the silence go on longer than he meant to because there was no answer inside him that he could hand to an 8-year-old. "Because she doesn't know your dad's face yet," he said finally. "That's all." Lily looked out the window and didn't say anything, and that was how he knew she didn't believe him. She was 8 and she had already learned to let adults keep the answers they needed to keep. He watched her walk through the front gate, and he watched the security guard glance up at him from the curb, and then he drove downtown with his jaw tight and his hands too careful on the wheel. He got to the building at 7:30. The lobby was still half asleep at that hour, the coffee cart just setting up to the morning light coming through 40 feet of glass and laying long, bright rectangles across the floor. Ethan took the seat he always took when he came down here, the low chair in the left corner, angled slightly away from the elevators, the one you had to walk past to see. He set down a paper cup of coffee. He opened a laptop that was 9 years old and had a hinge so loose it made a small sound like a sigh every time the lid moved. He was 40 years old and he owned this building. He had grown up in a neighborhood where the streetlights went out block by block and nobody came to fix them, and he had put himself through school and then through failure and then through 11 years of grinding a company out of nothing. He was the majority shareholder now. His name was on the ownership documents, on the lease, on the incorporation filing. He could have walked into any room in this tower and had a chair pulled out for him. 3 months after he closed on the building, a floor supervisor had asked him for identification in his own lobby. That was the thing nobody understood about the way he dressed. People assumed it was humility, and they said so, and he let them, because the truth was worse and harder to explain at a dinner party. He dressed plainly because he had learned exactly what an expensive watch did and did not do. A $40,000 watch would stop people from suspecting him. It would not stop a single one of them from suspecting the men who looked like him and didn't have one. So he kept the shirt, and he kept the laptop, and once every few weeks he came down and worked in the lobby for a morning. And he watched. He told himself it was about culture. He told the leadership team it was about culture, and they nodded and thought he was being folksy. But that morning, sitting in the left corner chair with the deadline on his screen and his daughter's question still lodged somewhere under his ribs, he was honest with himself about what he was actually doing. He wanted to know what happened to people who did not look like they belonged here. He wanted to know because he had lied to Lily in the car, and he was going to have to face her again at dinner. The lobby filled up around him the way it always did in waves tied to the elevator cycles. By 8:30, there were maybe 30 people moving through at any given moment, and 4 of them had settled into the open seating to work. That was normal. The company had opened the lobby as flexible workspace 2 years earlier, And on any given morning, you'd find a handful of people down there with laptops and cold coffee, escaping a noisy floor or waiting on a room. At the desk 2 tables over sat a young man named Daniel Reyes. Daniel was 28 and in his second year as an analyst, and he had come down to the lobby because the 7th floor had a broken air handler and sounded like a wind tunnel. He had headphones on, one ear cup pushed back, and a spreadsheet open that he had been staring at for 11 minutes without changing a single cell. He noticed the man in the corner the way you notice furniture, a shape in the room, nothing more. He did not think about him again for another 40 minutes. Nobody thought about Ethan Carter that morning. That was the point of him. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and leave it without anyone being able to say later whether he had been there. At 9:12, Victoria Hayes came through the lobby carrying a tablet and a stack of quarterly binders. She was 30, and she was good at her job, and both of those things mattered more than the story usually allowed for. She had come up through operations, made floor supervisor in under 3 years, and pulled 2 consecutive performance reviews in the top band. Eleanor Voss, who sat on the board and did not recommend people casually, had put Victoria's name forward herself. She knew every fire exit on 4 floors and the name of every person who worked on them. Halfway across the lobby, a woman from accounting came the other way with an armload of files sliding sideways, and Victoria stepped in without breaking stride and caught the top third of the stack before it went. She walked the woman all the way to the elevator bank, holding half her load. At the front desk, she stopped and asked Grace, the receptionist, how Marcus was doing, Grace's son, 7 years old, out sick since Thursday. She used the boy's name. She remembered it because she had asked about him 3 weeks earlier and had made a point of remembering. If you had stopped 30 people in that building and asked them whether Victoria Hayes was a decent person, 30 of them would have said yes. She was also carrying something else that morning, and it was legitimate. 5 weeks earlier, a company laptop had been taken out of that lobby in the middle of a Tuesday in daylight with people sitting 8 feet away. The incident report had gone up the chain, and her director had sat her down and told her plainly that lobby security was hers now, that flexible workspace could not mean an unsupervised room, that the next one was going to have her name on it. She had a written memo in her files saying exactly that. She was doing the job she had been told to do. She passed the first person working in the open, seating a woman in a blazer near the window. She did not stop. She passed the second, a man by the coffee cart with a badge clipped to his belt. She did not stop. She passed Daniel Reyes at his table with his headphones half off. She did not stop. She stopped at the fourth one. "Excuse me," Victoria said. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was not rude. Ethan noticed that immediately, and it was the part he would think about for a long time afterward. She was not hostile. She was not sharp. She had the tone of a person who already had the answer and was performing the question as a formality. He looked up from the screen. "Working," he said. "Working for who?" "Operations." Victoria's eyes moved over him, the shirt with the collar gone soft from washing the laptop with the hinge, the paper cup. It took about 2 seconds. "I don't recognize you," she said. Ethan lifted 2 fingers and touched the badge hanging against his chest. He didn't say anything. He just held it slightly forward the way you do when you want someone to read. Her eyes went to it and away. That was the whole thing right there, and he knew it in the moment it happened. She looked. He was certain of that. She had looked directly at the badge, and her eyes had moved across it, and then kept going, and in that half second, the badge had stopped being information and become an obstacle to get past. She hadn't read a single letter of it. He had seen that particular movement of the eyes before. At a grocery store in Delaware, from a man who had followed him up and down the same 3 aisles for 15 minutes and then apologized without ever admitting what he had been doing. At an airport gate. In this exact lobby, 3 months after he had signed the closing papers on the tower. "Sir, you can't just sit in this lobby," Victoria said. Ethan turned back to his screen and typed a line of a project brief that was due at noon. "I've been sitting in it since 7:30, he said. "That's not what I asked." "No," he agreed. It isn't. 2 tables over, Daniel Reyes pulled his headphone all the way off his ear. He hadn't meant to listen. The lobby had good acoustics for the wrong reasons, glass and stone, and not enough soft surfaces, and the conversation carried farther than either of the people having it seemed to realize. Across the room, the woman in the blazer looked up and then looked down and started typing again. "I need you to pack up and leave," Victoria said. And there it was, the line spoken out loud in a room with 30 witnesses. Ethan's hand stayed on the keyboard. Something in his chest went very still and very cold, and inside that stillness, he saw the whole thing laid out in front of him with unusual clarity, the way you sometimes see a chessboard. There were 3 roads out of this chair. The first was in his bag. 12 inches from his right hand in the outer pocket of a leather case was a single sheet of paper with the company letterhead and his name on it, listing him as majority shareholder and chairman of the board. He could put it in her hand, and this would be over in 3 seconds. He would be back to his deadline by 9:15. She would apologize and mean it, and go upstairs and tell the story that night as an embarrassing thing that happened at work. The second road was the one he had taken his entire life. Close the laptop, stand up, say sorry my mistake, and walk out of a building he owned and drink his coffee somewhere else. He had done it in stores and in lobbies and once in the parking garage of his own office park. It cost nothing except a thing he could never name out loud, and it worked every single time, and it changed nothing at all. And the third road was to stay in the chair and let the room watch what happened next. He thought about the light on 5th and the sound of his daughter not answering him, because that was the arithmetic, and it was not complicated. If he stood up this morning and walked away like he always did, then Victoria Hayes would go upstairs believing she had done her job correctly. And 2 weeks from now, or 2 months, she would come across the lobby again and stop at another man in a plain shirt. And that man would not have a piece of paper in his bag to pull out. That man would have to stand up. There would be no video and no story and no consequence, because who would he report it to, and what would he say? "She asked me what I was doing here, and she didn't ask the other 3. You could not file that. It didn't fit in any box on any form. The first road ended this. The third road ended something bigger, and it cost him everything he had built as an ordinary man in this building. Ethan shook his head, and his hands did not leave the keyboard. "I have a deadline that matters," he said. Victoria's expression shifted. Up until that second, she had been managing a situation. Now she was being refused in public by a man she had already decided did not belong, and the 2 things collided in her in a way she did not examine. "I'm not sure you understand," she said. "I'm the floor supervisor." "I understand what you are." "Then you understand you need to leave." Ethan finished the line he was typing. He reached over and closed the laptop halfway, and the loose hinge let out its small, tired sound, and then he opened it again and kept working. It was such a minor movement. It was not defiance in any way you could have described to a third party. But everyone watching understood it perfectly, because a man who intends to leave does not open his laptop back up. "I don't want to make a scene," Ethan said. He meant it. And there was something else underneath it that Victoria could not hear, and that Daniel Reyes, 2 tables away, heard perfectly. It was the sound of a man giving the other person one last exit, holding the door open for her dignity while it was still possible. "Then go," Victoria said. She folded her arms. Behind her, Grace at the front desk had stopped what she was doing. The woman in the blazer by the window was looking at her screen and not reading it. Daniel had both hands flat on the table. Ethan looked up at Victoria Hayes for a long moment, and in that moment, he stopped being a man having a bad morning and became something else. A man who had decided to let a room show him exactly what it was. "No," he said. He put his hands back on the keys and began to type. Victoria stared at him. For 3 full seconds, she did not seem to have language for what was occurring, and when she found it, her voice had risen just enough that the people on the far side of the lobby turned their heads. "Are you refusing direct instruction?" The clock on the wall behind the reception desk read 9:14. I'm following instructions from my own department, Ethan said. He said it without heat, and that was what made it land badly. Victoria had braced for an argument and instead received a correction delivered in the tone of a man explaining a filing error. What department? Operations. I have approval to work down here today. Approval from who? The director of operations, Ethan said. You can call him. It's 15 seconds. Victoria did not call him. She stood there with her tablet against her hip and her quarterly binders under one arm and something in her face closed. She was not thinking about the director of operations. She was thinking about a man in a 9-year-old shirt who had told her no in front of the entire lobby and was now sitting there typing as though she were a delivery notification he had swiped away. I don't care about your deadline, she said. I understand that. I'm the floor supervisor. This lobby is my responsibility, not operations. Ethan took a sip of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier, set the cup down and kept working. That was all. And the calmer he became, the more Victoria felt the ground tilting under her, because a person who refuses you loudly is a problem you can solve, and a person who refuses you quietly is a problem you cannot. 5 weeks ago, somebody walked a company laptop out of this lobby in broad daylight, she said. 11 o'clock in the morning, 8 people sitting right here. She said it with real feeling, and there was real feeling in it. Her director had put it in writing. Flexible workspace cannot mean an unsupervised room. The next one has your name on it. She had read that memo 4 times the week she got it. She had walked this floor every morning since, with her eyes moving over faces the way a person does when they have been told to look for something and not told what it looks like. I know about that, Ethan said. I read the report. Then you understand why I'm asking. I understand why you're asking someone. He looked up at her then, and his voice stayed level. There are 4 people working in this lobby right now. You walked past 3 of them. Victoria's chin came up. That's not, it might not be. I'm telling you what happened to, not what it means. She had an answer for that. She was sure she had an answer for that, and it stayed just beyond her reach, and the not reaching it made her angrier than anything he had said out loud. She had accounted for herself in 1,000 meetings. She had been recommended to this company by a woman who sat on the board, and Eleanor Voss did not put her name on people casually. She had 2 straight years of top band reviews in a file upstairs. She was not the kind of person this man was implying she was, and she knew it. And the knowing came with such certainty that it never occurred to her to check. 2 tables over, Daniel Reyes started to stand up. He got about halfway. He had his palms flat on the table and his weight forward, and he was already framing the sentence, "Hey, I think he's fine. I've seen him around," which was a lie. He had never seen him around, but it would have been enough to slow this down for 30 seconds, and 30 seconds was all it would have taken. Then he sat back down. He would spend a considerable amount of time afterward trying to reconstruct what happened in that second and a half. Nothing dramatic happened. He did not think about his job exactly or about Victoria, who he had spoken to maybe 4 times. What happened was that he became suddenly and acutely aware that the whole lobby would turn and look at him, and that he was 2 years into a first real job, and that it wasn't his floor, and that somebody more senior was surely about to step in. He pulled his chair back to the table and looked at his screen and typed a line into a cell and deleted it. Typed it again. Deleted it. He was not working. He was manufacturing the appearance of a man who was too busy to be part of this. Nobody else moved at all. That was the part Ethan was actually recording. Not Victoria. Victoria was one person having one bad instinct on one Tuesday. But there were roughly 30 people in that lobby, and every single one of them could hear, and the room had settled into a particular quality of quiet that he recognized from other rooms in other years. Heads came up and went down. The woman in the blazer by the window turned a page of nothing. Grace at the front desk had a phone in her hand and had not dialed it. He thought with a flatness that surprised him this is what she was asking about. His daughter had asked why the school guard learned every other parent's face and never learned his, and he had told her it was a matter of time, and here was the answer he had actually owed her, playing out in a building with his own name on the ownership filing. Not a slur, not a shout, just a room full of decent people looking very hard at their screens, while one man was asked to justify occupying a chair. Victoria took her phone out of her jacket pocket. She stepped away 4 or 5 paces toward the elevator bank, turning her shoulder, the universal posture of a person who believes they are having a private conversation. She was not nearly far enough. The lobby was glass and stone and polished floor, and it carried her voice the length of the room the way it had carried everything else that morning. Security, this is Victoria Hayes, floor supervisor. I need a man removed from the lobby. Ethan's hands stopped. Male, Victoria said. Black, blue shirt, corner seat left side by the window. The order of it went through him like cold water. She had 4 things she could have led with. He was wearing a shirt. He was in a specific chair in a specific corner of a room with only 4 occupied seats. He was one of maybe 6 people down here with a laptop. Any of those would have identified him inside 3 seconds to a guard walking off an elevator. The first thing she reached for, ahead of the clothing, ahead of the location, ahead of everything, was the color of his skin. The dispatcher's voice came back thin and clear through the phone, loud enough to reach him. Copy that, we're on the loading dock, 5 minutes. Victoria put the phone away. Ethan sat very still and let 5 minutes begin to run. His screen lit up with a notification, and he looked at it without moving his head. Board meeting moved to 2 o'clock. Marcus Hale already in the building. He read it twice and set the phone face down on the table. And something reorganized itself inside him with an almost audible click. Because up until that moment, he had been treating this as an unpleasant morning that he would eventually resolve with a piece of paper. He had been sitting in the discomfort the way you sit in a cold room, waiting for it to end. Now he understood he had been asking the wrong question all morning. The question was not, how do I get out of this chair with my dignity? He could do that anytime he wanted. He was the majority shareholder. 12 inches from his hand was a document that would flatten this situation like a hand coming down on a table. The question was, what happens in this lobby on the mornings when the man in the corner chair is not me? And he already knew. It happened. It had been happening. It happened to a delivery driver last spring maybe, or a contractor, or a new hire on his second day, and none of them had a document in a leather case, and none of them filed anything afterward because there is no form, for she walked past 3 people and stopped at me. You cannot report a tone of voice. You cannot report the order in which someone described you on a phone call. It evaporates the second you try to hold it up, and everyone who witnessed it goes home and does not mention it, and the whole thing costs the company nothing and costs the man everything. And the number of times it has occurred inside this building is currently precisely 0 because nobody counts it. Ethan Carter smiled. It was very small, and it did not reach anything. Somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, he stopped being a man being judged and became a man who was going to do the judging. Victoria came back across the lobby with her arms crossed and her weight settled, the posture of a person who has just been handed the win. Security is on their way, she said. Ethan reached out and closed the laptop. The loose hinge made its small, tired sound, and this time the lid came all the way down and the sound of it carried. Every head in the room came up. It was the first thing he had done all morning that was not passive. I know, he said. They're still coming. Victoria's arms uncrossed slightly. What, you called them? They're coming. I'm not going to stop that. Then why? She looked at the closed laptop, at the man not moving, at the 4 minutes now standing between this moment and the elevator doors. Then why are you still sitting here? Ethan looked at her. Because I want you here when they arrive, he said. The lobby went entirely quiet. It was not a threat. There was nothing in his voice you could have played back as a threat. That was precisely what made it land the way it did in the stomach rather than the ears, and Victoria felt the first thin crack open in the certainty she had been standing on since 9/12. She had expected him to bolt, or shout, or produce some excuse. She had not built any room in her head for a man who would sit in a chair and wait for the guards with her. She recovered because she was good at recovering. "Who are you?" "Ethan Carter. I know your name," Victoria said. "You told me your department." "That doesn't make you—" "No," Ethan said. "You know the name on my badge. You don't know it because you read it." He stood up. It was the first time all morning he had been at his full height, and the room adjusted to it in a way nobody could have articulated. He was not a large man, and he did not raise his voice, but he stood the way a person stands in a place that belongs to them, and something about the geometry of the lobby changed. He glanced at the wall clock behind the reception desk. 9:20. 3 minutes. Then he bent, picked up the leather case from beside the chair, set it on the table, and opened it. There is something worth stopping for right here before the paper comes out, because almost everyone watching this in the lobby that morning, and everywhere since, is waiting for the same thing. They are waiting to see Victoria Hayes's face change. There is a specific pleasure in that moment, and it is not a complicated one. The arrogant, brought low, the dismissed man revealed as the one holding all the cards. But consider what that pleasure is actually built on. Suppose Ethan Carter were exactly who Victoria took him for. A single father with a 9-year-old laptop and a soft collar and a project due at noon. No document in the case. No ownership filing with his name on it. In that version, in 3 minutes, 2 guards come off an elevator and walk him out of a building where he has done nothing except sit down. Nobody films it. Nobody writes it up. He goes home, and at some point his daughter asks how his day was, and he says it was fine. The paper in that case is not the good news of this story. It is the worst thing in it. It means that fairness here has had to depend on a coincidence so unlikely it might as well be a lottery ticket. And then there is the other thing which is harder to sit with. Victoria Hayes is not a monster. 40 minutes ago, she carried half a stack of files across this lobby for a woman she barely knows. She remembered a 7-year-old's name because she made herself remember it. If you asked her directly whether she treats people differently based on how they look, she would say no, and she would believe it completely. Bias almost never walks into a room and introduces itself. It arrives as a feeling, a sense that something is slightly off. It even brings a reason with it, and the reason is usually true. A laptop really was stolen from this lobby 5 weeks ago, and she really was told it was her responsibility. The reason is true. It simply does not explain why she walked past 3 people and stopped at the 4th. Ethan took out a single sheet of paper and handed it to her. Victoria read it standing up, which was a mistake she would think about later. It was 1-page company letterhead notarized, the sort of document that gets produced for banks and never for people. It confirmed Ethan Carter as majority shareholder and chairman of the board. The blood went out of her face in stages from the top down. Yes. And at that exact moment, the front doors opened, and Marcus Hale came through them with 2 people from his staff, mid-sentence coat over his arm, moving at the speed of a man with a full calendar. Hale had run the company as chief executive for 6 years. He crossed a quarter of the lobby before he registered the man standing by the corner chair. He stopped talking in the middle of a word. "Ethan, I didn't know you were down here. We moved the board to 2 o'clock. Do you want me to pull it earlier?" Ethan did not look away from Victoria. "No, I'm busy." "Fine. 2 o'clock. Hale lifted a hand and kept walking, and his staff went with him, and the whole exchange took 11 seconds. He never learned that morning that anything had happened at all. That was what finished it. Not the document. The document was paper, and paper can be argued with. What could not be argued with was the chief executive of the entire company stopping in the middle of a sentence to ask a man in a faded blue shirt whether he wanted the board meeting moved and then accepting the answer. Victoria stood holding the page with both hands. "But you were sitting here," she said, "working, in the lobby." You don't look like... She stopped. She did not finish it, and she did not finish it because somewhere in the last 3 words she heard herself from the outside, and there was no version of the end of that sentence she could say out loud in a room with 30 people in it. Ethan did not help her. He did not fill it in or soften it or offer her an easier phrase to land on. He simply stood there and let the unfinished sentence sit in the middle of the lobby, and the quiet stretched out long enough for every single person in that room to complete it privately in their own head, in their own words. At the table 2 spaces over, Daniel Reyes put his hand over his mouth. "I've spent all morning down here," Ethan said finally, "watching how people get treated when leadership isn't in the room." Behind him in the elevator bank, the machinery engaged with a soft mechanical thud and a cable began to run. Victoria heard the elevator running, and her voice dropped and quickened at the same time. "I didn't know," she said. "I thought you weren't supposed to be here. I was trying to protect the company." Ethan did not answer immediately because he was doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic was not going the way people would later assume it had gone. Firing her was expensive. Eleanor Voss had put Victoria's name forward personally, and Voss sat on the board he chaired, and there was no version of this where that conversation did not happen. Victoria had 2 consecutive top band reviews sitting in a file 11 floors above them, and at least 4 people in this lobby knew it, and they would carry the story out of here in whatever shape suited them best. And he had nothing hard. No recording, no witness statement, nothing that would survive a wrongful termination filing. What he had was a phone call he had overheard, and the order of 4 words in it, and a woman with a written directive from her own director telling her to secure this exact room. Every road out of this cost him something. Forgiveness was the cheap one, and everyone would praise him for it. He could put a hand out, tell her it was an honest mistake, send her upstairs, and be back on his deadline by 9:30. He would be called gracious. And the memo that went out afterward, the one nobody would ever write down, but everyone would understand, would read, "This is survivable as long as you pick the right man." He thought about a yellow light on 5th Street, and a child looking out a car window because she had already learned not to press. "You saw my badge," Ethan said. You could have called the director of operations. It's 15 seconds. I was trying to protect the company." "No," he said. "You were protecting your assumptions." Victoria's hand tightened on the sheet of paper. 5 weeks ago, we lost a laptop out of this lobby. I know. I read the report." Ethan's voice did not rise. "I'm the one who asked for the report to be written." She had nothing to put after that. "There were 4 people working in this lobby this morning," he said. "You walked past 3 of them. You stopped at me. Do you want to tell me why?" Victoria opened her mouth. The wall clock behind reception ticked over. Somewhere above them, the cable was still running. She stood in the middle of a room she had supervised for 2 years, holding a notarized page in both hands, and there was no answer available to her that she could say out loud in front of 30 people, and the search for one was visible on her face, and the failure of the search was visible after that. Ethan turned and walked to the reception desk. Grace was already half standing. He asked her quietly for a sheet of company letterhead and a pen. She gave him both without a word, and he came back to the low table by the corner chair and set the page down beside the 9-year-old laptop and began to write. By hand, in the middle of the lobby, in front of everyone. It took perhaps 90 seconds, and it was the longest 90 seconds of that morning. Longer than the phone call, longer than the unfinished sentence. Nobody moved. The only sound in that entire glass room was the point of a pen moving across paper, and 30 people stood or sat and watched a man compose a termination in real time because he had not brought one with him and had not come down here intending to write one. He signed it. He wrote the date underneath. He turned the page around and held it out. "Your employment with this company ends today," Ethan said. Victoria took it. She did not read it. "You are not being fired for failing to recognize me," he said. "You're being fired because you decided a person didn't belong here before you verified a single thing." If I had been an ordinary employee, you would have done exactly the same thing, and that is the problem. The elevator doors opened. 2 security officers came out scanning the room the way they had been trained to, looking for a black man in a blue shirt in the left corner seat. Ethan turned toward them, and his voice was perfectly even. "Thank you both for coming up so quickly," he said. "It's not necessary anymore. But if you'd like to help, please escort Ms. Hayes out to the main lobby." The older of the 2 officers looked at Ethan, and then at the woman standing beside him with a handwritten page in her hand, and then back at Ethan. He had worked the building for 4 years. He had never spoken to the chairman in his life, but he had seen the photograph in the annual report, and something arranged itself in his face. "Yes, sir," he said. Nobody shouted. Nobody was humiliated out loud. Victoria Hayes walked between 2 guards she had summoned herself across the floor of a lobby she had supervised for 2 years, past a dozen people who 40 minutes earlier had been looking very carefully at their keyboards. She did not cry, and she did not argue. She held the letter against her chest with both hands, the ink still wet enough to smudge under her thumb, and she went out through the glass doors into the morning. There was no triumph in the room when she was gone. That surprised people afterward when they described it. What settled over the lobby instead was something closer to nausea, 30 adults standing very still in a bright room, each one privately reviewing the last 14 minutes and their own precise location in them. Then Daniel Reyes stood up. 14 minutes too late, and he knew it, and he stood up anyway. He crossed the open floor with his headphones still hanging around his neck. "Sir, are you actually the chairman?" Ethan looked at him in the flat palms the spreadsheet he had been pretending to work on, the chair he had half risen from at 9:14, and then sat back down in. "Unfortunately," Ethan said. Daniel laughed. It came out wrong and nervous and much too loud, and it broke something open in the room, and 2 or 3 other people laughed with him out of sheer relief. The lobby started breathing again. "Don't worry about it," Ethan said, and he raised his voice slightly so it reached the rest of them. "I don't expect anybody to recognize me. Just treat everyone in this building with respect, including the people you're absolutely certain are nobody." He looked around the room, and the room looked back. "There were 4 people who saw this from the beginning," he said. "I'm not blaming any of you. I understand exactly why you stayed in your seats because I've stayed in mine plenty of times. But I hope next time at least one person stands up. And I hope that person doesn't need a piece of paper in their bag to do it." Daniel Reyes did not say anything. He went back to his table and closed his spreadsheet, and he did not look at his screen again for a long time. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Ethan opened the leadership meeting on the 11th floor. He did not open it with Victoria. "This morning I sat in the lobby," he said. "Someone decided I didn't belong there. The problem is not that she was wrong. The problem is that for 14 minutes, not one person in that room, including her, including the 4 people sitting 8 feet away, stopped to verify one thing. Read the badge. 2 seconds. Eleanor Voss was on the video link from the West Coast, and she did not wait for anyone else. "I recommended Victoria Hayes to this company," she said. "I've known her family for 9 years. Are you sure you haven't overcorrected Ethan?" "No," Ethan said. "I'm not sure." The room went quiet in a way that leadership rooms rarely do. "But here's what I do know. If I keep her, the message this building receives is that what happened this morning is survivable as long as you don't aim it at the wrong person. And I can't run a company on that message. I'd rather be wrong about one manager than right about a policy that tells 400 people to check a man's face before they check his badge." Voss did not answer for a moment. Then she nodded once on a screen from 3 time zones away. A director near the end of the table asked the only question that mattered. "So what do we actually do differently?" Ethan had been waiting for it since 9:26. "Ask before you accuse," he said. "Verify before you escalate, and never confuse what a person looks like with what a person is worth." 3 things changed, and none of them were dramatic. Employees could work in shared spaces with valid approval, and the authority to grant or revoke that approval no longer sat with any single individual on any single floor. If a supervisor believed someone did not belong, the supervisor could raise it and someone else would decide it. Identity had to be verified through the badge system before security could be contacted, and every security call in the building was logged and reviewed quarterly. That last part was the piece Ethan cared about most, and he had to explain it twice before people understood why. A single call means nothing. A single call always has a reason, and the reason is usually true. But if the same kind of person keeps getting called on quarter after quarter, then the numbers will say it out loud in a language that cannot be argued with in a hallway. And the third was said plainly to all 400 employees in 11 words. Security is not a weapon that serves an individual's authority. Several months later, Ethan Carter came back down to the lobby on a Tuesday morning. He sat in the low chair in the left corner. He wore a plain shirt. He set down a paper cup of coffee and opened a 9-year-old laptop, and the loose hinge made its small, tired sound, and he started working on something due at noon. At 9:20, a woman he did not know came across the floor toward him, a new floor supervisor 6 weeks into the job, carrying a tablet. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. Can I help you with anything?" "No, thank you," Ethan said. "I'm just working." "Great," she smiled and went on toward the elevators, checking something on her tablet as she walked. She had no idea who he was. That was the whole thing. Same lobby, same chair, same man, same soft collar, and same failing hinge, and a completely different outcome, produced not by fear and not by recognition, but by a room that had learned a different reflex. If she had known who he was, it would have proved nothing at all. Across the lobby near the delivery entrance, a manager Ethan didn't recognize was speaking to a courier in a tone that had an edge on it. Nothing outrageous, just a little too sharp, a little too fast. The particular clipped register people use when they have already decided the person in front of them is a problem. Daniel Reyes stood up. He did it without hesitating and without looking around first. He walked over, said something quietly to the manager, 6 or 7 words. Nobody heard what they were, and the manager's shoulders came down, and he nodded and turned back to the courier and said something that ended with the word sorry. Daniel went back to his table and sat down. He did not look toward the corner chair. He did not check whether anyone had seen. He put his headphones on and went back to work, and that was the point, because a man performing decency for an audience proves nothing, and a man doing it when nobody is grading him proves everything. Ethan watched and said nothing at all. Then he opened his laptop to begin an ordinary day instead of closing it to confront one. Nobody asked for his badge that morning or any morning after. Not because they had finally learned his face, most of them still hadn't, but because they had learned something more useful, which is how to treat a stranger decently without needing to know who he is first. The man who once had to write out a document by hand in the middle of a lobby to prove he had a right to sit in a building he owned no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Not because he had become more powerful, because the place had finally stopped requiring it. His phone buzzed on the table. Lily. "Dad, are you coming home?" "Of course I am, sweetheart." "Did you have a good day? I learned something," Ethan said. "What?" "Sometimes the best way to find out what's wrong with a place is to sit still and let everybody show you." Lily laughed at that the way she laughed at most things he said. "Did you fix it?" Ethan looked around the lobby. A security officer was nodding hello to a courier at the loading door. Daniel Reyes was settling back into his chair with his headphones on. Light came through 40 feet of glass and laid long, bright rectangles across the floor the way it did every morning at that hour. And he thought about a yellow light on 5th Street and a question he had answered with something he did not believe. "I think so," he said. Then he closed the laptop. Victoria Hayes believed she was calling security on a single father with an old laptop. She never knew she was calling security on the one man in that building with the authority to remove her from it. And in the 5 minutes it took 2 guards to ride up from the loading dock, she lost her job. But Ethan Carter did not fire her for failing to recognize the owner. He fired her for failing to recognize something considerably more important: that every human being deserves respect, and most of all, in the exact moment you are certain they have no power to demand it. You will never know who is standing in front of you, but the truth is you don't need to. Because how you treat a person should never depend on what they can do for you or what they can do to you. And if you look closely, the person who changed most in this story is not Ethan Carter. He already knew everything he needed to know before he sat down that morning. It isn't Victoria Hayes either. She was gone by 9:26. It's Daniel Reyes, the one who got halfway out of his chair and sat back down. The one who typed a line into a spreadsheet and deleted it and typed it again just to look like a man too busy to be involved. Because most of us are not Ethan. We do not own the building, and we do not have a notarized page in a leather case 12 inches from our right hand. And most of us are not Victoria. We have never called security on anyone in our lives. We are the person at the next table. The one who hears every word, who knows exactly what is happening and knows exactly that it is wrong, and who decides in a second and a half, without ever quite putting it into words, that somebody more senior will surely handle it, and that this is not really our floor, and that it is not really our business. It took Daniel Reyes 14 minutes to stand up the first time. It took him no time at all the second time, months later, for a courier whose name he did not know, with nobody watching and nothing to gain. So if today you stop and ask one more question before you conclude something about a person, or if you simply stand up once when you see something that isn't right, then this story has done the only thing it ever wanted to do. And maybe somewhere tonight a man will go home without having to figure out what to tell his daughter about why somebody asked for his name again.